Just imagine, a brand new passenger jet worth nearly $100 million, delivered fresh from Europe's factories, suddenly disappears. No distress signal, no flight record, no passengers ever boarded it. One day it's on the books of Airbus, and the next, it simply vanishes. If this sounds like the plot of a spy thriller, it's because the real story is even stranger than fiction. In the early 2000s, Airbus was celebrating what should have been a triumph: the delivery of one of its sleek A320 aircraft to China, part of its push into one of the fastest-growing aviation markets on Earth. At the time, China was rapidly expanding, eager to fly more people across its massive domestic landscape. Every major plane manufacturer wanted in. But then something happened that stunned French engineers and European aviation authorities. This particular Airbus A320, a machine of cutting-edge design, vanished from all records. No commercial airline ever flew it. It didn't appear on any published routes, any schedules, or even in the maintenance books. The plane had become what intelligence officers quietly began calling the ghost plane. Now pause for a second. Think about that. Commercial jets are some of the most carefully tracked machines on Earth. They file flight plans, log thousands of maintenance checks, and generate constant streams of data. Losing track of a plane this valuable is almost impossible. And yet, an entire $100 million piece of engineering brilliance disappeared. So what really happened? For almost 2 decades, the mystery sat in silence. Airbus officials didn't publicly acknowledge anything unusual. Governments avoided the topic, but behind closed doors, suspicion brewed. Intelligence agencies in Europe were already monitoring Chinese efforts to leapfrog into aerospace technology. And then the revelations came. Alan Gier, former head of France's powerful DGSE intelligence service, eventually went on record. He confirmed what had long been whispered in the corridors of aviation. The missing Airbus had not been lost, stolen, or scrapped. It had been deliberately dismantled. Piece by piece, bolt by bolt, China's engineers had taken the aircraft apart to study every single component. Imagine walking into a hangar and seeing a brand new jetliner not in the sky, but in thousands of fragments. Wings separated, avionics removed, wiring traced, every system mapped. According to intelligence reports, this wasn't sabotage or destruction. It was a dissection. And it had a single purpose: to replicate it. This was the foundation of what would later become the C919, China's answer to Boeing and Airbus. Now let me ask you, if you were in charge of a rising superpower desperate to break into one of the most advanced industries in the world, would you spend decades building everything from scratch? Or would you start by copying the masters? The story gained even more credibility years later. In 2021, the long-rumored ghost plane was finally spotted. In Jiangsu province, photographs emerged of an abandoned Airbus A320, stripped and gutted, sitting forgotten in an open field. To the untrained eye, it looked like a derelict relic of an old fleet. But to intelligence insiders, it was the smoking gun, a physical remnant of an industrial espionage project hidden in plain sight. Patrick Devow, a former Airbus vice chairman of economic intelligence, gave chilling testimony. He stated outright that the C919's similarities to the A320 weren't coincidental. They were direct. The vanished A320 had been sacrificed as a blueprint. And yet, Airbus itself remained silent. Why? Because in the world of international aerospace, confrontation is rarely worth it. Airbus, desperate to maintain access to China's booming airline market, had to swallow the bitter pill. As Devow put it bluntly, you have to ask yourself, does it serve any purpose to accuse them? Would it stop them? Or would it destroy billions in future contracts? That silence reveals an uncomfortable truth. In global business, protecting intellectual property sometimes comes second to protecting market access. Now let's zoom out. Some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, is this even unusual? Haven't other nations done the same thing before? And you'd be right. Reverse engineering has been a powerful, if controversial, tool throughout history. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union famously reverse-engineered American aircraft, electronics, even space technology. Japan, in its post-war boom, closely studied Western consumer goods before leaping into global dominance with its own innovations. But here's the twist. While copying can help you catch up, it rarely helps you leap ahead. A photocopy may look convincing, but it usually lacks the depth, efficiency, and refinement of the original. And that's exactly where the story of China's ghost plane gets interesting. By dismantling the Airbus A320, Chinese engineers gained insight into the architecture of a proven workhorse. They didn't just study how the fuselage was shaped or how the wings were joined. They studied the wiring, the hydraulics, the cockpit layout. They mapped the invisible veins of modern aviation. The result was the C919 project, a national symbol of pride, positioned as the first homegrown large passenger aircraft. On paper, this was China's declaration that it would no longer depend on Western manufacturers. The ghost plane had been transformed into a blueprint for ambition. But despite all the rumors about this ghost plane, COMAC and Chinese authorities never publicly acknowledged the issue. And as said earlier, Airbus has officially denied such malicious allegations. So here's the question for you. Should we call this theft, or should we call it strategy? If the end result is a functioning aircraft, does the origin story even matter? You might wonder, why is the disappearance of a single aircraft 2 decades ago still relevant today? Because it set in motion a clash far bigger than one missing jet. It revealed the tension at the heart of globalization. Western companies, eager to sell, often bring their crown jewels into new markets. But those same deals expose their designs to duplication, modification, and in some cases, outright cloning. The ghost plane is more than a story about espionage. It's a symbol of how fragile trust can be in industries worth billions. And here's what makes it even more intriguing. Despite this elaborate effort, despite China copying one of the world's most successful jets, the C919 has struggled mightily outside its own borders. International buyers remain skeptical, and the global duopoly of Boeing and Airbus? Still intact. So where does this leave us? A plane disappeared, was dissected, and reborn as China's great aviation hope. Yet 2 decades later, the very industry China wanted to conquer still views the C919 with suspicion. Which raises a much bigger question. If airlines around the world are desperate for new jets, why won't they take a chance on China's offering? For decades, commercial aviation has been controlled by 2 giants, Boeing and Airbus. Between them, they hold nearly 90% of the global market. Their planes are everywhere, from tiny regional carriers to major international airlines. This duopoly isn't just about who sells the most planes. It's about control over safety standards, global supply chains, and the trust of hundreds of airlines that can't afford to gamble with reliability. Now, imagine being China, a rising superpower with the world's second-largest domestic aviation market. Every year, millions of new passengers take to the skies. Demand is exploding. The government doesn't want to keep handing billions of dollars to foreign manufacturers. They want their own champion. Enter the C919. On the surface, the program looks like a massive success. Over 850 orders have been announced. More than 24 customers appear to be on board. At first glance, that's a remarkable feat for a new entrant in one of the world's most competitive industries. When you dig deeper, almost every single one of those orders comes from inside China. Out of 24 total customers, 23 are Chinese airlines or leasing companies. And here's the kicker. Nearly all of them are state-owned. In other words, the Chinese government is essentially ordering its own planes from itself. So while the headline looks impressive, the reality is that international airlines, the ones that could validate the C919 globally, are staying away. Here's where the illusion begins to crumble. If the world's airlines are desperate for planes, and trust me, they are, then the C919 should be selling like wildfire. Boeing is crippled by safety scandals and manufacturing chaos. Airbus can't build fast enough to meet demand. Airlines are facing decade-long waits for delivery. Smaller carriers in Asia, Africa, and Latin America should be lining up for alternatives, but they aren't. Why? Here's the paradox. The C919 is technically a new design, built in the 21st century, incorporating modern aerodynamics. By logic, it should outperform its rivals, which are based on airframes from the 1980s or even the 1960s. And yet, it doesn't. The aircraft's maximum range is just 3,000 miles, far less than the Airbus A320neo or Boeing 737 MAX. Its fuel efficiency is weaker. Its payload flexibility is more limited. Imagine you're running an airline. You could choose between two jets, one that flies farther on less fuel, and one that burns more and goes shorter distances. Which one would you pick? That's the reality buyers are facing. Now here's the part that surprises most people. Despite China's reputation as the world's factory, the C919 is not truly Chinese. More than 90% of its components come from foreign suppliers. Avionics, hydraulics, landing gear, even parts of the fuselage. And the most important part? The engine. The C919 runs on the LEAP-1C engine. That sounds impressive. It's from the same engine family powering the Airbus A320neo and Boeing 737 MAX. But there's a twist. The LEAP-1C is a downgraded variant. Unlike its Western cousins, it doesn't deliver the same 15% fuel burn improvement. Its internal design is closer to an older model from the 1970s. In other words, the C919 is flying with yesterday's technology, while its rivals are already flying with tomorrow's. But here's the biggest problem: trust. Global suppliers are wary of giving China their best technology. Why? Because of the very history we said earlier: reverse engineering. Companies fear that if they hand over their most advanced systems, they'll lose their competitive edge forever. So instead of cutting-edge tech, China gets older versions. And that creates a vicious cycle. Without the latest systems, the C919 underperforms. And because it underperforms, international airlines hesitate to buy. So let's step back. On paper, the C919 has hundreds of orders. In reality, almost all are government-driven. On paper, it's a brand new competitor. In reality, it's powered by older technology. On paper, it's the challenger to Boeing and Airbus. In reality, it hasn't convinced a single major international airline to take the plunge. This doesn't mean the program is a total failure. For Beijing, the C919 is still a symbol of progress, a step toward independence from the West. But in the commercial world, symbols don't fill order books. Performance, trust, and long-term reliability do. And that's where the C919's illusion of success begins to collapse. The real problem isn't just performance, it's something deeper. Because in aviation, even a plane with weaker range and efficiency can sometimes survive if it proves two things: reliability and support. Airlines don't just buy planes, they buy into decades of maintenance, parts, and service networks. Let's start with something airlines care about more than anything else: reliability. It doesn't matter how advanced a jet looks on paper. If it can't consistently take off, land, and fly on schedule, it becomes a financial black hole. Airlines live and die by their on-time performance. Airbus and Boeing spent decades building this trust. Their jets have proven reliability across millions of flights, thousands of airports, and through countless unexpected problems. That trust isn't written in brochures. It's earned through decades of crashes, fixes, redesigns, and global collaboration. Now compare that to the C919. It has only a handful of aircraft actually flying today. It doesn't have the flight hours, the global service history, or the statistical data to prove it can keep up. Think about it this way. Would you buy a brand new car model that's only been tested by a few hundred drivers, while other cars on the market have been road tested by millions? That's exactly the risk airlines face with the C919. But reliability isn't the only barrier. Even if the C919 proved reliable, there's a much bigger issue: support. When a Boeing 737 or Airbus A320 lands in Nairobi, Bangkok, or Santiago, parts and mechanics are available. There are certified workshops, maintenance crews, and decades of spare parts already stocked worldwide. If something breaks, it can be fixed in hours. Now imagine a C919 breaking down in Lagos or Buenos Aires. Where are the parts? Where are the certified mechanics? Where are the trained engineers? They don't exist yet, which means every delay could last weeks or even months. Airlines simply cannot afford this. A grounded plane doesn't just lose money. It disrupts schedules, frustrates passengers, and damages the airline's reputation. Aviation isn't just about engineering, it's about geopolitics. Right now, over 90% of the C919's critical systems, avionics, landing gear, flight controls, and especially engines, come from Western suppliers. And those suppliers are under export restrictions. If political tensions rise, those parts could be cut off. We've already seen glimpses of this. Washington has placed export limits on advanced aerospace technology, making it harder for Chinese companies to access cutting-edge designs. So airlines outside China look at the C919 and see a risky dependency. What happens if a government pulls the plug on spare parts? Overnight, the aircraft could become unflyable. Imagine running an airline and waking up to news that your entire fleet of jets could be grounded because of a trade dispute. Would you take that gamble? Most airlines won't. Another silent killer for the C919's international dream is sheer production scale. Airbus and Boeing together produce more than 1,000 aircraft per year. At peak efficiency, Airbus alone builds one new A320 every single day. COMAC? In over a decade, they've only managed to deliver a handful of C919. Their most ambitious goal is to reach 150 planes per year by 2030, a fraction of what Boeing and Airbus already produce. This matters because airlines need reliability not just in the skies but in their orders. If a carrier signs up for 50 planes, they want them delivered on time, not stretched across decades. And even if COMAC ramps up production, there's still one invisible wall standing in the way, something you can't measure with blueprints or factory output. Aviation is not just about wings and engines, it's about perception. Airbus and Boeing have brands built over decades of trust. They survived accidents, recalls, and scandals, yet airlines and passengers still choose them because they've proven resilience. The C919, however, carries a different reputation. Many outside China view it as an imitation, not an innovation. The reverse engineering origins taint its image. The perception that it's a political tool, not a competitive product, makes foreign buyers hesitant. Now, here's the paradox. Within China, the C919 is already a hero. It gives Beijing leverage over Boeing and Airbus, reduces dependency, and plays perfectly into the narrative of self-reliance. But outside China, the same plane is seen as an untested gamble, caught in political crossfire, with no support infrastructure. So the C919's future looks split. A domestic workhorse, yes. A true global competitor? That's far less certain. The C919 isn't just an airplane. It's a statement. A statement that China won't accept Western dominance forever. But turning that statement into a real alternative will take decades of reliability, infrastructure, and global trust that can't be reverse engineered.